Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris, Pedikei, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're going to be learning today Daf Mem Aleph, and we are beginning at the beginning of the third line, Mamish, at the beginning of the third line, at the words Beches Kasan, and here is where we are at. We just quoted the Tosefta that speaks about the same case of the Mishnah, and it verbalizes all that we said, even though some in the Mishnah is only implied. The case is when a person put vegetables in their attic for storage, and they ended up taking root. So the Tosefta, as you can read on top of the Amid, says, they continue halachically as they were, meaning as detached produce. We view them as detached produce concerning the laws of Meiser. What's the law of Meiser? That if you have an item that actually increases in volume, but it only does that when it's detached from the ground, that increase does not need to be tithed on any level, not only not midoiraisa, not even midrabanan. Shvius means that midrabanan, something that has spontaneous growth, on Shvius is prohibited to be eaten with exceptions. So if these onions were placed on the attic and they got attached, they created a root, they rooted into the ground, and they increased on the year of Shvius, they are allowed to be eaten because they're considered detached. However, now the Tosefta writes the words that we also have in the Mishnah, but the im hayu tameim alu mitumasan. That is the Tosefta. And now the Gemara today will ask why. What's the rationale? Why would we differentiate? Why do we differentiate? Make up your mind. Is it considered detached? Is it considered attached? Tuma has one standard. Maisris and Shvius has another standard, and we're going to give a source for that, after which the Gemara is going to quote the conclusion, the ending of this Tosefta, and analyze it. And from there, we're going to move on to the new Mishnah, to Halacha Beis. Now, the Halacha Beis is predicated on a Isur. One is not allowed to sell untithed produce. Nakuda, period. Meaning, even if I'm selling my food items to a chaver, to someone who will separate Trumas Umaisis, I, as a seller, am not allowed to sell a davar she'enoi misukin. Number two, that prohibition never applies to produce that's still attached to the ground because it's attached. So, for example, when I sell you my field, doesn't matter that if during the time of the sale, let's say it's an orchard, on the trees you have fruit. If it's a stay lavan, right, during the time of the sale you have standing grain. Doesn't matter, because attached produce was not included in that prohibition. That is all what you need to know before learning the Mishnah. And the Mishnah will begin by giving you the exceptions where in certain circumstances, even while something is attached to the ground, it may not be sold under that prohibition. You're not allowed to sell a davar she'eina mesukin. It's gavaldik. Now, I want to just, again, words of introduction. We're not going to have this explicitly, but we have to know this information. When the Torah writes in the portion of Kedoshim, Lifnei iver lo yisitein michshel, which means literally in front of the blind, do not place a stumbling block. It's amazing how almost all of the Rishonim don't even learn it literally. It's not only that they add to it. And this verse is for sure primarily understood, maybe even exclusively understood, to mean that don't cause someone to sin. Now, this is a very generic statement. It has to be really broken down. Let me say the following, that when I'm going to take an action, give advice, propose something, when I know that the other will, because of my proposal, sin, because of my making available non-kosher sin, that is where it's biblically prohibited. If I don't know that for sure, I just want to make that clear, then midoiraisa, there is no isur of lifnei iver. How do you know the other person is going to violate? Rabbinically, even if it's not known for sure, whenever, and these are the words, whenever there is a significant possibility of transgression, which would be, as an example, when someone sells produce to a non-chaver, there is a significant possibility of transgression. Not vadai, because many people, even Amaratzim, tithed all of the tithings. But you had a significant minority that only tithed some of the tithings. So there's a concept of lifnei iver le'sita michshol that's going to play a lot into the reasons behind the exceptions that the Mishnah is going to give. Another word of introduction, and we learned many times, that the halachic land of Syria, which is more or less where the country Syria is located today, was conquered by David HaMelech. It was conquered by David HaMelech in such a way that halachically it's viewed as a kibush yachid, not a kibush rabbim, which means that it never became bona fide part of the Holy Land. But on a rabbinic level, produce that grows in Syria has to be tithed. Produce that grows in Syria is included rabbinically in the laws of Shvi'is. But what happens if a non-Jew owns the land? Now, in the Holy Land, if a goy owns land upon which grows produce, we have a machloikis tanoim. Some are of the opinion, and these are the words, ein kinyan la'akum lahafkiya. Just because the goy owns it, it doesn't remove the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. And even though the non-Jew is not commanded to tithe, but the produce needs to be tithed biblically. In Syria, not only is the obligation of tithing to begin with only rabbinic, if the property, if the land belongs to a non-Jew, then even on a rabbinic level, there is no such obligation, as we will see today. Now, the Tana Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, or in short, the Rashbag, holds that the Chachamim did not impose a Meiser obligation on Syrian or on Syrian produce unless two conditions are met, the way he's going to understand it. Number one, a Jew has to be the one owning the produce at its oinas hamaisris. This is important. Oinas hamaisris means, I'm speaking generally, when produce is attached, growing, once it reaches a third of its growth, even though we learned in this Masechta, the Mishnah giving for many items a specific time. But many understand that there is a common thread under all of the different zmanim is that it reached a third. Another way of wording it is that if you will now detach it, its seed is potent enough to be replanted because it reached a third. If you were to detach it prior, if you were to harvest it so prematurely, kaput. So that stage is called the oinas hamaisris. So number one, a Jew has to be the one owning the produce while attached. During oinas hamaisris, if a non-Jew owned it at that time, even if later it was sold to a Jew, it will never be obligated, midrabanan, to tithe. We're speaking about Syrian or Syrian produce. Number two, the Jew's ownership isn't enough vis-a-vis the product. He also has to own the land. In other words, in Syria, only when a Jew owns the land and the produce connected to it, while it hit oinas hamaisris, then later when you harvest it, v'chulei, will there be that rabbinic obligation? Okay, we're gonna leave it at that. And Chavre, let's go right away to Daf Mem Aleph again. We are in the beginning of the third line. We just finished reading out the Tosefta. And as it says in the Tosefta, we're repeating the words Beches Kosan. That means that these example onions that took root in the attic, the owner didn't want, but it took root. So the Tosefta says they remain in their halachic chazaka, which means just like they were detached. When you put them on the attic, they are still considered detached. So the Braita Tosefta itself says concerning Meiseres and Shvi'is, they are becheskasan. And now the Gemara is asking Va'at Amar Alu, and yet you in the Tosefta, you in the Mishnah are telling me that concerning the laws of Tumah and Tara, they lose their status of Tumah because they are considered attached. The Gemara wants to know why. Why don't we have one criteria? Is it attached or is it detached? So answers the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi b'Shem Rabbi La, or otherwise known as Rabbi Ila, but we remove the aleph in the Yerushalmi. HaTorah ripsa b'tara zurayim. The reason why we are lenient concerning the laws of Tumah, in other words, we remove its Tumah with a minimum amount of attachment, is because this removal of Tumah was actually hinted to in a pasuk in Parsha Shmini, My tama in the Yerushalmi doesn't mean what's the rational reason. It means what's the source. So the pasuk in Shmini reads that v'chiyipol min nevlasim, that if even only a part of the carcass, we're speaking about the shmoyne shiratzim, that in par tuma, if they fall, the pasuk says, on seeds while they are detached, the pasuk says they become tamei. But then if they fall al kol zera zerua asher yizoreya, but if they fall on a seed that's already sown, a seed that's attached, then even if it was tamei, it becomes tar, and vadai, it can never acquire tuma because attached product cannot become tamei. Now, there are different ways of understanding the limud. Rashi in the Bavli says that the words asher yizoreya were the necessary words. That the Torah is telling you that if a carcass falls on a seed that's sown, that's planted, it remains tar. The words zera, zerua, those two words are superfluous. That's the way Rashi learns. For some reason over here, the Maraful, the 8 lines from the top, understands that zera, zerua is the ikr. If it falls on a seed that's sown, that the Torah has to write those words, then those seeds will not become tamei. And the words asher yizoreya are extra words. Where does he get it from? I'm sure there are other Rishonim. The Marafulda is not a Rishonim. I'm sure there are other Rishonim, and he sides with someone else. But be that as it may, when you hear it, you know it's superfluous, right? Kol zera, zerua, asher yizoreya. One of the reasons, one of the limudim that we learn from the fact that the Torah is so elaborate regarding planting is Hashem is saying, no matter how minimally it's planted, even as in our case, which there are two negatives. What's the two negatives, Aviv? Number one, the person who put the onions there did not intend for it to be planted. Number two, it's not inside the earth. It's not planted the way things are normally planted. Normally, a vegetable you put in the earth. Nevertheless, because of these extra words concerning the dinim of tuma, the Torah says taharu. It's considered tahar, and we don't learn from there l'chala Torah kula. We leave that exclusive to the dinim of tuma and tara, and the moral lesson for us is great. You know, everyone speaks about being connected. I want to feel connected, and we all feel connected, and we don't. We struggle with that. So when it comes to spiritual purity, the most minimum connection already keeps us pure. Even though we should never feel sufficient, it's good to feel I'm not yet connected. But epis connection we have. A little root somewhere, even though we're not in the earth. Okay, weiter. Now we're going to continue this Tosefta. Tane. Amazing. What we learned yesterday, Rabbi Yechanan Reish Lakish, which is how do we view that onion vis-a-vis Shabbos concerning the prohibition of plucking something on Shabbos, something that's attached. So the Brais, the Tosefta says, lo yitloish, that's for Shabbos. Don't detach it. Avar v'tolash, but if you did it. So first of all, yesterday again, we had a machlokes, Rabbi Yechanan, Reish Lakish. What's amazing is that in this Tosefta, already by the time that the Yerushalmi was written, there were two versions. That means there was a question, what is the right text? And now we're going to learn both texts. Is Tanoy Yitani, in some versions that they had then, which is why we have it now, it says that Avar V'tolash Chayiv, and by the way, this is what we learned yesterday, B'Shem Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is the one that says that it's considered attached. Shabbos were very machmir. Come on, there's a root, it's attached. Is Tanoy Tanei, but there's another version that wrote in this Tosefta the words Patur. And as we know, as we just began in the Rambam, right? Chayiv, pater, muter. Pater doesn't mean it's permitted. Pater means pater avolosar. It's prohibited rabbinically. And now the Gemara asks a very interesting question. Man the Omar pater avolosar. That even according to the opinion that says that pater, first of all, man the Omar pater, it means avolosar. Slicha. That's what I just said is written in the Gemara. And now the Gemara has a very unique question. Guys, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that says that detaching such an onion on Shabbos is not chayiv. When he read in the Braisa that version, chayiv, he did not agree with it. It's clear. He's saying it because he must have had or must have paskened like the version that writes pater. Now let's go with Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is the one that says that for Shabbos we consider it bona fide attached. Therefore, toilish chayiv chatos. To man the amar chayiv, meaning according to Reish Lakish, according to the version chayiv, we understand. But man the amar patal aval asur. This is something that we need to understand. Now, Reish Lakish doesn't have to agree with it. But how would Reish Lakish understand the rationale behind saying patal aval asur? What's the question? According to Reish Lakish, what the Braisa, according to that Tana, should have said, completely mutter. And the way the Gemara words it is, Deloit sarcha, de la mutter. It should have written completely mutter. What kind of question is that? In other words, just like for Rabbi Yechanan went by the version chayiv. Rabbi Yechanan went by the version pater. I'm sorry. But when he read another version chayiv, he understood what they're saying. What is he saying? He's saying that just like for Tuma, it's considered attached, it's considered tahar. So if it's considered attached, you're chayiv. You know, he doesn't paskin with it. But we want to understand not what your opinion is. We want to understand how you understand the other side. Don't forget, when Reish Lakish says that you're chayiv, why does he say you're chayiv aviv? Because it's attached. Why would you be exempt? Because we would say it's not attached. According to Reish Lakish, it should have been either chayiv or mutter. And I want to add something. Many rabbinic law, including this one, that's the presumption, when they say something is patur, they say patur because even though in this scenario it's really allowed, but if you're going to be allowed to do it here, you might do it in a worse scenario. What would that mean? In other words, the logic here would be is, did you intend for it to take root or not? So when Reish Lakish read the version that said you pater means since you did not intend to plant it, it's not considered attached. But like leaving it on top of the ground. 1 second. And why would it be? What's the problem? That maybe if you'll be allowed to detach it when the person placed it there without intent of planting, then maybe when he'll put it there with the intention of planting, he also might take it. And there it's a problem. That's normally the way rabbinic rule works, that even though really it's permitted, but you might do the same thing in another case. The problem the Gemara has in the Kasha is that even if a person placed it there with intention to plant, we keep on mentioning there are two issues here. There are two reasons why it should be considered detached. Number one, you did not intend for it to get attached. But there's a number two. You know what the number two is? It was not placed inside the ground. The Gemara in the question holds that even if you put it there with kavana for it to take root, but it's not planted normal. Something that's not planted normal, what's the regular rule for Hilchas Shabbos Aviv? If something is not usual, it's not going to be prohibited midairaisa. All shaloi kedarkois go down a notch. So even if you planted it with kavana for it to be attached, max detaching it should be only patur. It should be only rabbinically prohibited. Here you didn't even intend to plant it. It should remain mutar. It's too big of a gap. That's the Gemara's kash. Man do amar chayev nicha. Man, the Amar Pater, when Reish Lakish read that version, and that version is, as we said, not mutter, Pater avalasur. Why? How did he understand it? It should have been completely permitted. So the Gemara says, no. Rab Shimon ben Lakish Amar Chayev. That indeed, Rab Shimon ben Lakish, without doubt, holds Chayev. The one that says Pater, Reish Lakish Bechlal cannot follow him. Look inside the Maraful, the 6 lines under the Gemara, above the Mishnah. He should have said completely mutter. So the Gemara says, Reish Lakish Amar Chayev, Koloimer al Karcha, Haman, the Amar Pater, is maflig ben roitza ve'eino roitza. This man, the Amar that says Pater, will hold that even if it's not in the ground, listen to my words, even if it's not in the ground, if you placed it there with kavana for it to take root, you will be chayiv. It will be considered attached, and therefore taking it will be a chiyuv. He must have learned that way. So it's not like, according to Reish Lakish, there are two reasons why it should not be considered attached. There's only one reason. What was your intention? According to Reish Lakish, according to that version, above the ground, below the ground makes absolutely no difference. It's only about, did you intend? Did you not intend? Reish Lakish personally holds, I don't care what your kavanah was. It doesn't make a difference. It's attached. You're chayev chatas. But he can see that if someone else will hold, we do differentiate. If you had in mind to plant it, then it's considered attached. If you had in mind only for storage, then it's not considered attached. Theoretically, if it's not considered attached, it should have been permitted. But since there is a gzeda, midrabanan, that if you're going to remove it when you placed it there, when you did not want it to be attached, you might remove it when you did want it to be attached. And in that case, you would be chayiv. It must be that way. Actually, the Amar chayiv, that's the way we're going to learn chayiv, that you would be chayiv even though it's not in the ground. In other words, you don't go muter chayiv. It's muter pater, pater chayiv. Okay. Atkan halacha aleph, and chavra, here we begin. As we already gave the background to this Mishnah in our words of introduction. One hand, you're not allowed to sell untithed produce, period, even to a chaver. On the other hand, the rule is that produce that's attached is allowed to be sold. If not, you imagine, how would people do business with fields? Well, you have to detail, it's fine. But the Mishnah will enumerate various scenarios where, no, you're not allowed to sell even attached produce prior to tithing it. And here are the words of the Mishnah. We're gonna get there. Well, one thing is clear, that while it's attached, you cannot tithe it. Lo yimkar adam es pirosav. We're speaking about attached produce. That's the whole chiddush here. Another nuance that the Gemara is going to add, I'll say it into the Mishnah right now. Even though the Mishnah mentioned the words peirosav, it's not only that it means mechubar. Just for the record, Aviv, when I have a field, I can sell whatever part of it I want. I could sell to you the fruits without selling you anything else while it's attached. That is not allowed. And even if I'm selling you the land with the fruit attached, even that, in the case of the Mishnah, will be prohibited. Now, that's a much bigger chiddush. Why is that a much bigger chiddush? Because when I only sell peiros, that's what I'm selling. If I sell land that has produce attached to it, one might have argued, I'm not selling produce. The produce is relatively so insignificant vis-a-vis land. I'm selling you land. It's almost like a bonus. It's garnished. We don't. This problem that we didn't even get there yet is even when I'm selling the land and the produce. No. I'm not allowed to sell it. Now listen to these words. When the produce reached this phase called the tithing stage, I'm going to use the words in the Holy Tongue, oinas hamaisres. We spoke it out in the intro. Let's generally say that all produce, when it reaches a third, it's third in development, third from its maximum ripened state, is called the time of maasros. Time for what? When it's attached, no one tithes. That's the cutting off point, that if someone harvested produce prior to it reaching to oinas hamaasros, it will never have to be tithed. It's not because it's not that ripe, because halachically it's not food. It's not. It's not food that can be replanted. Once I harvest something, once it hit oinas hamaasros or later, for whatever reason, then I have to tithe it. When do I have to tithe it? The way we learned before, when you make the meruach, when you take it into your house. But the oinas hamaasros is referring to this cut-off point. Prior to it, it's not called food. Post it, it's called food. So the Mishnah is saying that once the produce on the field, attached, reached the oinas hamaasros, but we have to be a farmer. Like you're asking, that's a good question. How do I know if it reached the third? I won't know. With AI, you take a picture and you ask the AI if you're allowed to rely on that. For sure not. So not yet.
As it reached hamaasros.
Yes.
But it continues to ripen off once it's picked and becomes edible, or is edible straight away. Is it still?
Let me just repeat the question, because I don't know the answer, but I like the question. There are certain products that continue to ripen after you remove it off the tree that I know for sure. I know my avocados are that way. Yeah. So what would happen vis-a-vis those items? I don't know.
Or even are edible, don't need to ripen, but aren't replantable, but are yet edible. You can eat them.
So that's already a machlokes rishonim. Whether oinus hamaisres is about it being replantable, whether the replantable is just a siman to know that it reached a third. These are good questions. Let's leave it open. So let's come back over here. So when I have a field and I have attached produce, once it reached oinus hamaisres, I'm not allowed to sell it. Lemi she'einoi neman ala maisres. I'm not allowed to sell it to the majority of the people that were not chaverim. They were not people that were meticulous in removing all of the trumas umaisres. Okay, it's amazing. Now, what does that mean? What do? You can't sell it. You can't tithe it. You can't sell it. Got to wait for the sale. And the reason for that is, I know it's not written in the Mishnah, is because of lifnei iver leisitan michshel. And that's why I spoke on in the intro that biblically there's no lifnei iver. Because even the people that were not meticulous about tithing all of the tithings, don't think it means that they were lax completely. It's not that way. Many of them tithed everything. But you don't know for sure that they're going to end up, once that product reaches its maturity, you don't know that they're going to eat it untithed. And why is it your issue? It's their issue. Since there were a significant minority of people that became lax in some of the tithings, so that original isur midrabanan, that I'm not allowed to sell davar she'ena mesukin, but normally it's attached. No. It's oinas hamaisres. The Chachamim said you're not allowed to sell it. L'misha ein eneman ala maisres, and the same would be, we're not focusing Masechta Shvius. There were people that were not careful when it came to the laws of Shemitah, which are many Shvius. You can't do business with Peder Shvius. You can't harvest Peder Shvius in a very large way, etc., 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 etc. Same idea. Once produce reached oines hamaisres, then you cannot sell either the produce attached or even the land with the produce to such a person. Why? Because there's a significant chance that now that they own it, they're going to end up violating the isurim either for maisres or for shvius. Next part, that's the next line of the Mishnah. In other words, what do I do if some of the produce reached, some of the produce didn't reach? Next line in the Mishnah. The imbikedo means the way they teach. If some of it reached the maturity, but some of it did not, gewaldig, good. You see, noitel esabakurais umoichal ashashar. What would you do? He's just giving you a practical advice. Even though we don't like to harvest produce prior to it reaching full maturity. But don't forget, this guy is doing a real estate transaction. The fruit is very insignificant. She's giving you a good eitzah. There's no bittul beroiv. Things that are attached are never nullified. Harvest that which reached oinash hamaisres. Make sure that what's on the field is only produce that's not yet oinash, and then to make your sale. Gewaldig.
Back to Alex's question, we still don't know what the Meister looks like.
I don't know. That's not a question. Wait a second. And look, I just want to read this. That's the way the Pnei Moshe learns this line in the Mishnah. This is the first widest line. Noitel es elu habukura somechles ashar shadayin ligirus hamaises v'komash malon. What's the chiddush? Sha'af al pi sheyesh bahen me'oisem shebikeru. Even though the land right now has both. Einam oisem limkod hakoil. We don't say, some of it already began to hit the stage. Now there's like a rabbinic imposed ban on sailing. No, we don't say that. No. Simply, you can remove it. Whether it's 2%, whether it's 20%, whether it's 80%, remove the oinas hamaisres and leave that and sell it. Beautiful. We're coming back to this, don't worry. In the Gemara, today's Gemara, we'll be back on this. But now we're moving on. We're moving on to another scenario where you will not be allowed to make a sale. You cannot sell produce. Lemi, that's chashut. Lo yimkar adam estivnoi. You cannot sell straw. Neither can you sell giftoi, means aleph residue, and zoigov, grape skins, which is basically grape residue. Now let me say the following: both straw and these residues are not subject to maisres. They're no longer considered oichel. Only that which is edible is subject to maisres. So, for example, how do you have straw, Viv? You remove the kernels, then you have the remaining straw. Happens to be that in the straw, there could be, and mistama, there always are a few kernels. Many people don't go for them. Same thing in these residues. The residue means you already extracted the oil. People might use it for fuel. But if you want to make the effort, you could extract liquid from the residue. If you were to do that, and you remove the kernels from the straw, if you squeezed out, like these fundraisers, they squeeze out the juice from the rock, you had it there and you got more oil. Now that you have oil, you have to separate mices. Now the question is, am I allowed to sell the straw to someone who's chashid? To someone who's suspect of not tithing properly? The straw as is doesn't have to be tithed. But there's a possibility that the buyer will actually take out the kernels. The buyer is going to take out oil or more wine from what most people will say, it's they say the whole world can become wealthy from the garbage of America.
It's the field. Even if you know the buyer to be not suspect, to have integrity, if there is a significant minority.
No. If you don't have integrity, the way it works halachically is that these people would actually make a public declaration that they will be very careful to remove tithings. Once a person did halachically what they need to do to fall into the category of a chaver, then you can sell to them. Why can you sell? Yeah. These halachas do not apply. And don't forget, guys, we're speaking about attached produce. If I'm a chaver and you're a chaver, I still am not allowed to sell to you detached produce, even though I'm telling you I didn't tithe it yet, because there is a rule, I'm not allowed to sell something that's not tithed. But here it's attached. So by attached, we say the problem of our Mishnah is only to someone who's not a chaver. Now let's come back to the case. So we have the straw, the olive residue, and the grape residue. The big chiddush here. No. None of it is attached. That's something else. That's a new case. What's the novelty? Because the way it is, it's not considered food. When I buy straw, by default, I don't have to tithe the straw. There might be a few kernels in there. Most people don't go for those kernels. The kernels were removed from it, which is why we're calling it straw. Nevertheless, since one may remove, one might do that. And if they do that, then that which they remove, now you have kernels. The kernels have to be tithed. So here's the chiddush. So 1 second. I want to add another word. Their expressed intent will make a big difference. They're trustworthy people. So if the guy that's buying the straw is saying, I'm buying the straw to feed it to my animals, you can sell it to them. But if the guy that's buying the straw is saying that I'm gonna get out the kernels, I'm going to use my machines. Today with technology, why would they give it? They would put it through the machine again. So they will do it. They're saying they will do it. Even though in its current state, it doesn't have to be tithed. It's very much like attached produce. Attached produce doesn't have to be tithed. But since they are saying that they're going to bring it to a place where some of it will have to be tithed, same concept, beautiful. So let's inside. Lemisha enenem ala maisres lohoitzi mehen mashkin. Lohoitzi mehen mashkin means that they are buying it in order to extract more juices, more liquids from this residue, and more kernels from the straw. Gewaldig. The daf mem alef on the base. Now the im hoitzi chayiv b'maisres. If indeed the sale was made, even though you should not have made it, and the buyer, as he said, got out more oil from the residue, more wine from the grape skins, etc. So the din is chayev b'maisres upatin min truma. We want to add another detail. Truma, this is so good, is approximation. By title law, there isn't even a minimum amount. Rabbinically, let's go that the medium, the average should be 2%, approximately 2%. When I began being the owner, let's say, and I removed the kernels, and I have this pile, and I'm removing Truma Gedoyla from 2% from the pile. You know what my kavana is? My kavana isn't only to remove the 2%, to be mesaken the remaining pile. My intention is to remove 2% from the pile, to be mesaken the pile, and the straw, and the kernels in the straw. And one is allowed to do that, because it doesn't have to be exact. So now if someone bought these straws, they bought the straw, the sale was made, okay? Or I'll tell you better, you sold it to a chaver, you're allowed to sell it to a chaver. The chaver bought the straw and he took the kernels out. What does the chaver have to do? Meiseres he has to remove, because meiser has to be exactly 10%. That means that when the original owner removed the 10%, meiser rishon, meiser sheni, meiser ani, from the pile, he moved it exactly for the pile. 90% stayed and 10% he took out. Even if he would have had in mind, you can't do it that way. So you'll be chayiv b'meiseres, but you'll be pater min truma. Why? These are the words of the Mishnah. Anyone who is removing truma, what's his intent? You can even argue, even if he didn't have that consciously. That's what truma is. Even al hakutoim. Even for, sometimes that when you threshed the stalks, animals trampled on it. What do you think? The animals got every single stalk? There can be a stalk or two that has that wasn't threshed. In other words, that there's a certain small percent that gets lost in the making of it. And in there are kernels. You have in mind for that. Or va'alatz dadim, for the sides of the pile. All different types of scenarios where there's a minimum amount of loss in which there are kernels. And whoever separates truma, his kavanah is for everything. And for the kernels which are inside the straw. And the same is also comes to remove truma from the oil. When it comes to removing not meiser, only truma from the wine, that your kavanah is for the little bit of wine that's in the residue. So that's a good thing to know. It's a great thing to know. Next, now a complete different topic. Again, it's the relation is regarding selling produce to someone who's not trustworthy, but as we mentioned, produce that grows in Syria, according to all of the opinions, even Lamanda Amar, that in the Holy Land, ein kinyan la'akum lahafkiya. When it comes to Syria, machlekes tanoim, exactly how to word this, we spoke out already, the Rashbag, that know that if produce belongs to a non-Jew in Syria, it does not need to be tied. Now, first, let's clarify that, and then let's go from it. Says the Mishnah, Halikeach sedei yarek b'Syria. The Mishnah is speaking about a vegetable field. I want to make it clear, Aviv, we're not only talking about a vegetable field, even a vegetable field, anything, just a mashal. When a person buys, we're speaking about the purchaser, and he buys it from a non-Jew. So the oinas hamaisis plays a role. If he bought the field from the non-Jew prior to its produce reaching oinas hamaisis, it reached this critical point while belonging to a Jew, it will never exempt. And belong, it's never obligated. Okay, let's clarify. If the land and its produce belong to a goy during oinas hamaisis and later, then it will always remain exempt. But if he bought it so it means when it hit this critical point, it had Jewish ownership, then yes, chayiv. Not this moment. When you harvest it, when you make the miruach, then you'll be chayiv midrabanan to tithe it. That's first of all. But if you only purchased it from its non-Jewish original owner, when it already had its oinas hamaiseres, it was already more developed. That means at the point of oinas hamaiseres, it then belonged to a non-Jew. This is where we say that forever this crop will remain completely exempt, but exempt from tithes. And you might think, okay, oinas hamaiseres, let's go with the third. By everything, okay. So I bought it from a guy when it reached the third, and you're telling me it will be exempt. One might have thought, okay, Yeshkoyach, you're exempt, go and harvest it now. If you're going to leave it in the field, how much could grow? 2/3. More than its size, double its size. All of that should be exempt? Like, don't do that. Which says you could do that. That veloikit kidarkoi v'hoilech. You don't have to tell yourself, well, I'm exempt, but let me not stretch it. Let me not take advantage of it. No. That you go ahead and let it grow until it's full size, even though the majority grew while it belonged to a Jew. It doesn't matter. This pineapple hit oinas hamaiseres when it belonged to a goy, and you're good to go. Now there is another. Go ahead.
Half the crops have reached.
Same thing that we learned before. That we don't give one rule for the whole field. Every crop is viewed, every stalk, you have to keep track. People who don't want to keep track, don't buy it. You're going to confuse yourself. Or if you didn't keep track, one of the things we just learned a few days ago is that when you harvest it, grind everything up and mix everything up, and then you're going to end up giving more than you have to, but at least no, because it's not, you're not selling it back to the guy and buying it back. It's only that time, only that crop, not the land. Okay, good. That's fine. Okay, now from the next line of the Mishnah, it's understood. I want to add one more detail over here, that if a produce was purchased from a goy after Oines HaMaisres, which means you'll be exempt, there's another issue. You know what the other issue is? The observer doesn't know that. Doesn't look good. I'm harvesting the field and I'm not tithing it. To make it known that this is a field that during Oines HaMaisres belonged to a goy, the Tanakama holds that field is only allowed to be harvested by its Jewish owner and not by a worker. You may not hire workers to harvest this crop. That in itself will be a reminder for the worker. I'm only exempt because this time the crop belonged to the goy. The observers will understand. Normally people get workers to help them. So that's something that's self-understood in the Tanakama. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, you don't have such a restriction. Not only can you let it grow until it's for maturity and not tithe any of it, you can even af yiskoid payalim. No, it's from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says you can even hire workers. That's verstandig that the Chachamim hold that you're late. You're not allowed to do it. Now,
what would happen if he did, according to the Chachamim, hire workers at that point?
I don't think there's a knas. I think by all the Suri de Rabbanan, there's no knas. To hire the workers, Okay. Amar Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says the Rashbag that we're talking about again this concept of Peiroi Surya being chayev or potter completely midrabanan from tithing. But medvaram amurim that if you bought produce from a goy prior to Oines HaMaisres, the Chachamim hold your chayev, right, because it belonged to the Jew during that critical point. That's only bisman shekana karka. It's only that when you bought the produce, you didn't only buy the produce, you brought the produce with its land. But aval bisman shaloi kana karka, people can buy produce while attached, not to take it now, to take it later. But if you only bought the produce, even though you bought it prior to its reaching to Oines HaMaisres, but when it reached Oines HaMaisres, even though you, the Jew, you own the produce, the land to which it was attached to, from which it's taking nourishment, belong to a non-Jew. According to the Rashbag, that's also going to remain potter. We're going to get back to this in the Gemara. Don't worry, we're going to come back. That's the beauty. We're going to go back to every part of the Mishnah. Okay. Now again, the Tanakama holds that since it reached Oines HaMaisres while it belonged to a goy, the Tanakama says, let it grow. It's going to double the size. The Tanakama says, doesn't matter. Rabbi argues. Rabbi says, no. I agree that the produce that when it had Oines HaMaisres belonged to the non-Jew, it's exempt. But you know what's exempt, Aviv? Only that part. That which grew in addition, that grew when it belonged to a Yid. Rabbi Yomer, af lefi cheshben, which means that the remaining 2/3 do have to be tithed. So now we have a machlokes on that as well, and I know we have only 1 minute. Let's go. I'm going to go. So we're going back to the first part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah, you have to remember, we're learning so many different dinim. We're learning the din that a person is not allowed to sell untithed produce to a chashud after it reached Oines HaMaisres. So Keina Masnisa, the Mishnah is not only to be understood when a person is only selling the attached produce. We spoke it out in the Mishnah. The emes is, the Mishnah is even speaking about a case, even if you're selling the land with the produce, like we said, you might say, you're not selling produce, you're selling the land. You know, maybe the guy, he might have not even paid more money for it. That's how much the pricing, what's chashuv, the real estate. You buy a house here in LA, you pay $1.4 million to get a beaten up house. What do you think? They're going to charge you more money if there's a mango on the tree? Like maybe they will. Another 30 grand for the mango. But it's nishchashuv. Nevertheless, that's the din. I just wanted to get it out there, and we'll stop, God willing, to be continued. 7 o'clock, nishker felach.